Hello everyone, my name is Ben Moore and I am the Ensemble Outreach Project Manager based at the EBI in Cambridge. Today I'd like to talk to you about my thoughts and experiences of both organising and delivering bioinformatics training in low and middle income countries. I'd actually like to start by going through my acknowledgements. All of the ideas and the thoughts that I'm going to be talking about in the presentation today actually come from very fruitful discussions and insights and collaborations with people all around the world who have helped me with my training events. So firstly, the ensemble team itself. It's a very large team and there's so many different people that are interested in delivering training and outreach. So I owe a lot of gratitude to everyone in the ensemble team. Also, they make the ensemble website and all the data that we host there. So without all of their work, the ensemble training workshops wouldn't exist either. Obviously, within the ensemble team, we have the outreach division. Lots of different people have worked in the ensemble outreach team, particularly Emily Perry, who was one of the main people who instigated our drive to deliver more workshops in low middle income countries. Across the EBI, there also is a training team who we work with very closely, particularly people like Sarah Morgan, Kath Brooksbank, and Piv and Patty from the EBI training team have all helped me in forming my ideas about training in low middle income countries and the best practices that we can integrate into our work. The long list of people here are a lot of collaborators and friends that I have met through the Bioinformatics Education Summit and workshops that I've organised in various countries and institutes around the world. And they've all been helpful and insightful in when I've been organising my workshops. So I want to start by introducing you to the Ensemble training programme. Many of you might have heard of the Ensemble workshops that we deliver. They're varied and they take place all around the world. But generally we have a particular format that we stick to for many of our workshops. So we generally deliver standalone workshops that are delivered by the Ensemble Outreach team. And we have two main flavours of these workshops. So we have our browser workshops where we introduce students to the Ensemble website and the different data types that we have there. This is mainly an introductory workshop that's aimed at wet lab scientists and people who are maybe newer to the bioinformatics field and who just want to get a flavour and an introduction to the sorts of things that you can do with Ensemble. We also run a REST API workshop. This is a more technical workshop that we run that teaches people how to access the Ensemble data programmatically using either Python or R. We use Google Colab and Jupyter Notebooks to provide worked examples and exercises for the students to access the data in Ensemble programmatically. So what we have with these workshops is a very particular format. So we mainly organise them through local hosts who we either know through previously hosted events or who have contacted us and are interested in hosting their own Ensemble event at their institute. We obviously also contribute to longer courses that are organised by other groups and other institutions. So we contribute very regularly to the courses that are organised by the EBI training team, both here on the Wellcome Genome campus in Cambridge and also off-site in other institutes and other host countries. And then obviously also we contribute to longer courses such as the Masters in Genomic Medicine courses that are run in many different universities across the UK. The training that the Ensemble team provides is free, so the host institutes don't pay for the training itself, but we do ask that the host covers the cost of the travel and the accommodation and the subsistence for the trainer. We have a dedicated training portal, so you can see the link at the bottom here. This is a website that we have that lists all of the information about our training events. It's also where we upload all of the training materials from our events for courses that are taking place in the near future, so that students can access the course materials at the time and also into the future as well. We do have information for hosts, potential hosts who are looking to host training, so they can see what they can expect from an Ensemble workshop as well. So Ensemble, so the training model that we have, where we have host institutes who normally cover the cost of travel and accommodation, means that what we found in 2016, 2017, around that time, is that the number of workshops that Ensemble was delivering in low and middle income countries was a very small fraction of the total workshops that we were doing each year. And what we really wanted to do was trying to improve the reach of the Ensemble workshops and trying to provide this training for people in low and middle income countries who were not able to access it before. So as a team, we applied for an open research grant from the Wellcome Trust to deliver Ensemble training in low and middle income countries. So the idea of this grant that we received was that the money would go towards covering the cost of the travel and the accommodation and the subsistence of the travelling trainer. What we found from conversations with hosts that we did have is that even though that the training was free, the costs that we were asking the host to cover were still inhibitory, especially if you consider our geographical location in Cambridge in England. Asking for a host to pay for a trainer to travel to South America or Africa or East Asia, for example, is not a trivial amount of money, and it ended up being inhibitory for delivering the workshops. As part of the grant as well, we developed an Ensemble Train the Trainer workshop in order to try and strengthen the training capacity and to build training capacity in the countries that we visited. So the idea is that alongside the Ensemble browser and REST API workshops that we normally deliver, we also ran a one-day workshop at the end for a small group of students who were interested in taking what they learnt in the browser and the REST workshops to try and deliver their own versions of Ensemble workshops for their peers and their colleagues into the future. The grant itself ran from 2018 to 2021, and it was obviously curtailed a little bit by the effects of the pandemic and the travel restrictions that we all felt around the world. But this is just an illustration of how that grant really shifted the split of workshops that we were delivering in high income countries and low and middle income countries. So in 2017, before the grant, we had around 90% of our workshops being delivered in high income countries. Obviously, you can see that we were able to visit some low and middle income countries, but normally the hosts from these institutes had specific grants or some money available to pay for the traveling trainer to visit them. In 2019, when this grant was in full swing and we were visiting and doing lots of workshops before the pandemic, you can see that the effect of that grant actually meant that we were delivering over 40% of our workshops in low and middle income countries. Obviously, this was a fantastic step because it meant that the workshops that we were delivering were reaching more people, a wider audience, especially people, those who might not have encountered Ensemble or come across the Ensemble training before. So why did we have this drive to deliver training in low and middle income countries, and why is it important? So a low and middle income country is defined by the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, but for the Wellcome Trust, and it integrates metrics and scores for GDP and the economy and comparisons in cost of living across different countries. One of the important things to remember that I want to revisit throughout this presentation is that even though we group them as one group when we say LMICs, they're not a single monolithic group, and in fact the setting, the context, the timing, and the specific location are always really important things to consider when you're organising workshops in low and middle income countries. The opportunities and the challenges are going to be different when you're giving a workshop in South Africa compared to in Brazil, compared to in India. So there's lots of different things to consider, but some of the common themes that I've encountered when I've delivered workshops and organised workshops in low and middle income countries is that there's an extremely high demand for workshops. I don't have the statistics in the presentation, but just anecdotally, the workshops in low and middle income countries that I've organised have normally been oversubscribed, and it's sometimes tricky to turn people away and to ensure that the workshops have a small enough audience that means that they can still be interactive and hands-on and worthwhile for the students that are there. Across low and middle income countries and in comparisons to high income countries, the knowledge gaps can sometimes be different to what you might be used to when you're delivering workshops in other situations. So it's important to always think about the different knowledge gaps and the background knowledge and understanding that the students will have. The availability of funding is obviously a really important one. This is something that we obviously encountered with our example that in the ensemble outreach team. Funding can be available in different settings, in different contexts, so it's always important to know that obviously bioinformatics training costs money, and that you need to have the money there in place and a suitable budget that we'll think about later. Of course, as well, the availability of the training facilities and the infrastructure to support the training is also really important, and we're going to think about how we can try and mitigate some of these challenges of the different of the infrastructure and the unavailability of the necessary facilities. So what I want to do in the second part of the presentation is think in a bit more detail about some of the things that you can consider and some of the things that you might want to think about when you're organising and delivering workshops in low and middle income countries. I've tried to divide a lot of the points that are going to follow into three main categories. So firstly, I wanted to think about the organisation of the workshop itself. So the idea is that we want to create an inclusive course that balances both the short and the long-term aims of the course within the available budget. Next, I want to think about the delivery of the course. So this obviously normally comes down to the day or the few days when you're actually spending with the students. Obviously, it also includes the development of the course materials and the program. So we want to develop and deliver a course with a format and materials that are adaptable to the situation, obviously knowing that low and middle income countries might have particular challenges with delivering advanced bioinformatics training, but they also adhere to the FAIR principles. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the FAIR principles, making sure that your workshop materials are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And what this means is that your workshop is likely to have a much longer impact and affect even people outside of the workshop who were not able to attend directly. And finally, after the workshop, we obviously want to make sure that our workshop is having the intended impact. So we want to know how to measure and increase both the short and the long-term impact of our training events. So one of the first things that you're going to be doing if you want to develop a bioinformatics training event in a low or middle income country is to define the aims and the learning objectives. So a number of these points that I'm going to discuss in the next few slides, I'm going to present them separately, but they're probably going to be coming together and forming a bit of an iterative process where, for example, you develop the course program alongside the budget, going back and forth between these two, balancing these two ideas to make sure that the course is providing necessary and worthwhile training for the participants, but also staying within the finance and the budget that's available. So one of the first things that as workshop organisers you need to do is to investigate the training capacity. Now this might relate to something like infrastructure. Obviously the ensemble workshops are completely online. All that the ensemble workshops require are computers and internet connections. For more advanced courses, then there might be some other things that you require, such as cloud computing and data storage and all those sorts of things. So before you even begin thinking about the workshop program, it's important to work out what the infrastructure that you have at your institute can support. The next thing that you're going to want to think about is assessing the trainees' needs. This can include things like the different subject areas that people need training in, the skills gaps that exist among the different trainees that you can try and aim to fill, and also the expectations of the trainees. Sometimes people attend a course thinking that they're going to be trained up to a certain level in doing certain tasks and skills, whereas that's actually not even within the scope of your course. So having conversations with the local trainees is also really important. You can try and assess the trainees' needs and build your workshop program by using competency frameworks that have been developed by organisations such as the ISCB, and also you're going to hear about the EBI framework as well that's going to be presented later on today. Another important thing is to try and integrate some long-term aims into your program. So building the training capacity in the future, providing networking opportunities for the trainees to meet other people in the field and to swap ideas and to get connected with one another. And as I said, it's really important to balance this all within the budget that you have available for you. Sometimes you have grand plans and really big ideas for developing an extensive course, but that's often not possible depending on the infrastructure and the budget that you have available. So balancing the budget with the learning objectives is a really important first step. In low middle income countries, the funding and the funding is not always readily available. So sometimes you have to be quite creative with finding the money to support the training that you're planning. So sometimes you might be lucky enough to work in a project that has integrated funding for training events within it. But you can also investigate some other smaller grants or other regional bodies aimed at training and capacity building as well. In the ensemble outreach team, what we've also come across are institutes within particular countries or groups of countries that are close to one another that try and collaborate to get more training for the money that's available. So basically grouping together and pooling money and resources in order to organize training across a larger geographical area. So as an example, I visited South Africa back in 2016, and a number of different universities in the Johannesburg and the Cape Town regions grouped together to pay for a single trip to the country and to travel around and deliver workshops there. So that can obviously be a way to overcome some of the inhibitory costs of organising training. One of the other things that you could consider if you're organising training is to apply course fees. This can be quite tricky because sometimes implementing course fees comes at a cost in terms of the accessibility for the trainees to attend the course. I have spoken to people who have attended courses and paid with their own money to travel across the country and to stay in a hotel and to attend a course. And that obviously is something that is a privilege for some people, but is not always possible for many people. So course fees can be a useful way to make sure that you have the resources and the money available to run the training in the first place, and sometimes it's a necessary thing to do. But it is important to remember that having course fees does make the event sometimes exclusionary to some groups and people who don't have the funding and the resources to attend training. There's actually a really nice budget template that you can find and use from the H3A Bionet training guide as well. The next thing that you're likely going to do is to choose your set of instructors. So obviously through my personal experiences, I'm used to being a traveling trainer that travels internationally to visit different institutes around the world to train people on one specific resource. Obviously, this comes at quite a cost in terms of the environment and the financial side of things in terms of paying for a trainer. So sometimes it's a case of balancing inviting international specialists in a one particular resource, such as the Ensemble browser, compared to having local trainers who can act as advocates who are more aligned with the opportunities and the challenges of training in low middle-income countries. They'll also be more aware of the data sets and the skills and the knowledge gaps that the students have. So what I've often found in many situations is that what is actually the best compromise is having a group of both local and international trainers that can contribute to a course that provides strengths in all of the different training aspects. One of the important things to remember is that inviting an international trainer does not always come at such a huge environmental and financial cost anymore, because we have the beauty of virtual training that has been thrust upon us in the last few years. So inviting international trainers can also be something that happens virtually. Obviously, there are some drawbacks with providing virtual training, and that's something that you have to think about in your course program as well. One of the other things that I've encountered that I think works really nicely is to utilize teaching assistants from the local university and from your institute. This helps to build the capacity, and it can also be integrated into a train-the-trainer sort of style workshop afterwards, where the teaching assistants themselves are given more skills and more tools and resources for developing and teaching their own courses in the future. So once you have decided on your course program and you've begun to put things in place to invite the trainers, you're going to want to start advertising and registering students for the course. As I've mentioned before, one of the main issues that I've come across, one of the main challenges I've come across when delivering workshops in low middle-income countries is that the courses are often oversubscribed. There's more demand for places than there is seats in the room. So oversubscription often means that a first come, first served model can be problematic in that people apply for the course because it's a course that's available to them. They don't necessarily read into whether the course provides training on a skill or an area that they need it in, or whether they have the suitable prerequisite knowledge for the course as well. So what I've often found when delivering workshops in low middle income countries is that it's important to really carefully think about the application form and to design the form with the questions that are guided by the learning outcomes that help you to assess the different applicants and to pick those ones who are going to benefit the most from the workshop. So the idea is that obviously once the application has been filled out by the students who hope to attend, you can form a diverse selection committee that have standardized criteria, and they can discuss and provide and offer places to the people that will benefit the most from the course. Obviously, we also have already thought about the workshop materials and how we can try and make them as accessible as possible through the FAIR principles. And so what you can obviously consider is how you can guide applicants who are not successful in the application process towards alternative resources or even the workshop materials and recordings once the workshop is finished. One of the other things to consider before the workshop starts, for both travelling trainers and for travelling participants as well, is the health and safety advice. When I've travelled for workshops for the Ensemble project, we've often used the UK government advice for looking at travel and accommodation advice. So this is an example of Nigeria, for example. You can see in the picture. The UK government has a really nice traffic light system showing you regions where it's where they advise against travel, where they advise against all but essential travel, or they consider that area safe for travelling for UK citizens. So within the Ensemble project, what we do is we only visit places and regions and countries that are considered safe according to the UK government, and I think many other governments around the world will have similar advice for their citizens for travelling to different countries around the world. So health and safety and security risks can be present within even specific regions within low and middle income countries. And as the organizer or the traveling trainer, you should always consider that people coming from outside might not be familiar with the different dangers and the different concerns that are present in that region. So it's always wise to sort of investigate, do your research before you go, make sure that you get your vaccinations that you need, and obviously try and make sure that you have a bearing of where you're going and how you're going to travel around. One of the other things to consider with low middle income countries is that visas can often be quite tricky to obtain and can be quite a long and laborious process. This can also include participants as well traveling from other countries. Sometimes it's difficult to arrange visas at the last minute, and you want to be able to provide the information for the students and the trainers well ahead of time. In the run-up to the workshop, one of the other things that you're going to be doing is developing the course materials. So again, in the ensemble workshops that we deliver, we have standard data sets and standard examples that we use for many of our workshops, but we try and adapt these to use local data sets and relevant examples for the types of areas and the types of fields of study that are being explored in that particular region or in that particular country. It's also really important to use tools and technologies that are actually available in the low and middle income countries themselves. Obviously with Ensemble, we don't have to consider this so much because it's an online resource that's available around the world free of charge. So there's not so much to consider in terms of the infrastructure support that's required after the workshop. But obviously you don't want to teach people about a tool or a technology that their university and their infrastructure would never be able to support after the workshop anyway. If you are teaching more advanced workshops that have computing and storage demands, then you might want to make the software available through virtual machines or in containers that can be run locally as well. Finally, as we've already discussed before, I can't stress the importance of enough of making your materials fair through the FAIR principle. So trying to make sure that your materials that you develop are saved and available somewhere where people can find them after the course and use them in their own training and to try and continue their learning afterwards as well. On the workshop itself, obviously you need to be prepared for problems, and in my experience, being flexible is the most important attribute in this situation. So here I've just tried to summarize some of the common challenges that I've come across when I've been delivering workshops in low and middle income countries, and some of the potential solutions that you might be able to employ to get around these issues. So firstly, loss of internet. This can be disastrous within a workshop. So what I have done and what we do in Ensemble as our best practice is to pre-prepare our offline materials. You can save these perhaps locally on a pen drive or share them via email ahead of time with the students. And you can also put the data sets on local devices as well. What this means is that if you do lose the internet for any length of time during the workshop, you can sort of default back to using the offline materials to make sure that you don't lose time and make sure that the momentum of the workshop isn't lost. The other thing that might happen is that you could lose power. I've had this happen a couple of times before. This obviously is completely detrimental to using computers at all. So the best thing to do in this case is have some printed workbooks and integrate some different flexible activities that don't require electricity. So bringing some post-it notes, forming small breakout groups, having discussion-based activities are the best thing to do. And if you can make these activities flexible, then it means that you can sort of, again, default back to these activities if you do have a sudden loss of power. I have also been in situations with issues with the venue where the room or the facilities are not quite available, are not quite suitable for the workshop that you intend to deliver. So it's always good to have alternative rooms and computers available as well. Sometimes people turn up without laptops, sometimes people don't have the right software or the right an up-to-date computer available. So having some backup laptops is important as well. If possible, it's really good to run testing before the workshop if possible. And finally, loss of time. So as I've mentioned before, it's really important to be flexible with the session and the timings and the content, and just be prepared to adjust your expectations. So sometimes you might set out with a program for the day where you hope to cover modules X, Y, and Z and give people time to explore in using exercises and demos and all those sorts of things. But depending on the course and the different challenges that you encounter on that day, sometimes it's important to realize that covering less is actually going to be a more efficient and more effective learning experience for the students compared to trying to rush through your very strict and rigid plan. And finally, it's also really important to remember to measure the impact of your workshops. So you can measure the impact most easily through using a number of different feedback surveys. So in the Ensemble Outreach team, we employ both long and short-term feedback. So the short-term feedback we ask students to fill out at the very end of the workshop to provide feedback about how the course was implemented, whether they found it engaging and enjoyable and useful at that time. But what we also try and do is we try and get feedback after 6 to 12 months. We ask students who have attended workshops in the previous period to fill in the same survey again, asking whether they have implemented any of the knowledge that they've used in their work, whether they plan to publish any work with using the skills that they've learned, and whether they've been able to pass on that information to other colleagues and peers as well. So it's important to have identified key learning objectives that you can try and assess with your evaluation. And we don't do this in Ensemble, but you can also perhaps think about how you can assess whether the students have achieved the different learning objectives that you've set out in your course. So I'm not used to running courses that assess the students at the end of the course, but if you do have some way of measuring whether students have achieved the learning objective, this could also be a really nice way to justify the course and to see whether you had the intended impact. And obviously, getting the feedback is one step, but then the final step and the more important step is actually taking the results from the feedback, looking at the demographic data, and then trying to implement improvements for future versions of the course to make the courses even more effective and even more impactful. So what do I see for the future of training in low and middle income countries? As I've already mentioned, virtual training has been thrust upon us, and in many cases I've seen virtual training embraced and integrated really effectively into training programs. In fact, virtual training has many benefits over in-person training that actually make it a preferable option. So firstly, we have lower costs. It means that the financial side of things that were initially inhibitory have been removed. We also have the extended reach and accessibility. So from being, for example, in Cambridge in the UK, where I'm based at the moment, we can reach people all around the world without having to travel, without having to organise flights and accommodation and all those sorts of things. And obviously, one of the main drivers of virtual training is the realisation that we can deliver courses to more people, but at a reduced environmental impact as well. So the model that we have in the Ensemble team, where a single travelling trainer travels around the world teaching people about Ensemble, is quite costly in terms of the carbon footprint. So trying to reduce that environmental impact is really important as well. One of the important things that we can obviously continue to do is to discuss training in low middle income countries and make sure that the importance is reinforced in people's minds. And we do this at the Education Summit, for example, as well. So the Bioinformatics Education Summit that's organised every year, we've, over the last few years I can remember, we've discussed training in low middle income countries. So thinking about how we can drive the training to provide resources for people to make sure that they have the tools and the resources that they need to organise the training that they want to do, pointing people in the right direction for training, pointing people in the right direction for funding, making sure that the training in low and middle income countries continues to grow. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'd just like to finally thank you all for listening and then also open the floor for any questions. Thank you very much.